evening, everybody. Good evening. Come on, if somebody else came in this room and he jumped up on the stage and he yelled out, "Howdy," what would you all say? Howdy. Much better. Thank you very much. So, tonight's program, my name is Stuart Schlossman. I'm president and founder of MS Views and News. I, too, have multiple sclerosis, and like I mentioned a few minutes ago, yes, I'm on the road like constantly doing all these programs. I do this because, well, I don't remember I have MS when I'm on the road. Okay, and it's a great thing just to keep busy and do things in your life and not sit around pondering, wondering when's going to be your next attack or whatnot. Just live your lives and make it the best you can. All right, tonight's program, we are sponsored by Sanofi Genzyme, Celgene, and Genentech. Okay, I hope you all can give them a round of applause. It's greatly appreciated what they do. Thank you. We can't do our programs without the pharmaceutical industry's help in sponsoring us to do these events. All right, it takes a lot to do it, and fortunately, we are backed to do this by them. It's my pleasure to introduce Paul Pelland. He's a former top 10 motorcycle endurance competitor from New Hampshire who now travels the country raising awareness and funds for multiple sclerosis. His goal is to document 1 million miles by motorcycle while sharing his inspirational story at hundreds of MS patient events and delivering keynote address and seminars for all types of audiences. You can follow Long Haul Paul on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. Despite living with MS himself, over the last 7 years, he has ridden over 400,000 miles. He set 3 world records and has raised over $180,000 for charity. Let's welcome Paul Pelland.
How's everybody doing? So far, so good. How was dinner? Everybody enjoy dinner? Let's see a show of hands. How many people don't like to raise their hand? All right. How many people think we're going to have chicken? How many people think chicken causes MS? Every time I go to one of these events, they serve chicken. Coincidence? All right, well, thank you, Stuart. Multiple sclerosis affects each of us in different ways. My MS symptoms are mostly cognitive, short-term memory loss, mental fatigue, multitasking, impaired planning, decision-making, and short-term memory loss. Despite the hours and hours that I spent preparing this slide deck and presentation, I have absolutely no idea what slide comes next. But thanks to technology, we have lots of ways to help us out, right? When we remember to use them. I also experience numbness, burning, tingling, sensations, and loss of strength issues. Heat is a big enemy of mine. Trying to get messages or signals through the damaged circuits in my brain gets difficult when my body temperature rises even slightly, which immediately causes all my old symptoms to reappear. Hot weather slows me down to a crawl. How about you? Anybody else? Hot weather? Yeah, we don't have to worry about that for a little while. Lately, I've had to deal with a cheating, lying, good-for-nothing bladder. And that's been real fun, especially when traveling with all my gear on. When I was first diagnosed, it was very clear to me the importance of getting on treatment to slow the progression of multiple sclerosis. I've been on disease-modifying therapy now for almost 15 years. I also started taking better care of myself by exercising regularly and eating healthier. Most importantly, I've discovered by continuing to do something that I really love, following my passion of riding every single day, I've been able to keep this disease from controlling my life. Please remember, MS is not who we are. If you look up MS up in the dictionary, I guarantee you will never see my picture. So make sure your picture never makes it there either, okay? Before getting diagnosed, I was a top long-distance motorcycle competitor, and I rode in some of the toughest motorcycle endurance competitions in the country. During what became my last competition, I experienced weakness, loss of dexterity in my hands, confusion, and memory loss. I retired from competing, and I pretty much gave up riding motorcycles altogether. I tossed away my dreams, my plans for the future. I sold my business, and I prepared for the absolute worst. Well, it never came, so I stopped waiting for it. 7 years ago, I realized, although I could never compete in motorcycle endurance rallies anymore because of my symptoms, I could still ride a motorcycle across the country, and that I'd thrown in the towel a bit too early on a sport that I really loved. Within a few months, I recalculated my entire life's road, and I am now on a fantastic adventure, riding every day possible, following my passion, while trying to help others recalculate their life's road as well. The story I'd like to share with you tonight is real, but the names and dates have been changed to protect the innocent. Back in 2001, I was not yet experiencing any signs or symptoms of multiple sclerosis. But I rode a motorcycle that did. Lemons and Long Shots is the story of my experiences entering the granddaddy of all endurance competitions called the Iron Butt Rally. It took me over a decade to realize how entering the world's toughest motorcycle competition on the world's most unreliable motorcycle ever built was frightfully similar to everyday challenges brought on by the unpredictable symptoms of multiple sclerosis. However, this adventure also taught me that there is nothing MS can stop me or you from attempting. We just have to work a bit smarter and push a little bit harder. But we can accomplish amazing things when we put our heart and our souls into it. Although this story is about a motorcycle competition, I hope you will soon realize the motorcycle represents MS and all of its symptoms. The event, the competition, represents daily life. And the rider, who happens to be me, could easily be any one of you here today. Has anyone ever heard of the Iron Butt Rally? One person. All right. Well, more people have been in space than have finished the Iron Butt Rally. It's called the world's toughest motorcycle competition. It's held every other year. It's 11 days long, and the average rider will ride 11,000 miles. Points are accumulated by reaching checkpoints after visiting optional bonuses picked from hundreds of possibilities. It's not a race. It's like a scavenger hunt on steroids. A drawing is held to determine which riders get in from thousands of entries. I know a few spots were held for oddball bikes and antiques. So when my name wasn't drawn for the 2001 event, I sent a letter begging to ride the biggest piece of junk motorcycle ever built if they would just let me in the rally. I told them I would ride a Russian-made motorcycle called a Ural. Oh God, we're hearing over here. Somebody has seen a Ural. Knowing how unreliable and poorly made the bike was, the organizers first replied they thought that I was an idiot, but my entry was accepted. At this point, not only did I not own a Ural, I had never even seen one in person. Excitedly, I wrote the bike's manufacturer for support to see if they would sponsor me. The company responded, "Sorry, Paul, but nobody here in our office actually thinks our bike could even finish the event." So I found a used Ural, hot rodded the engine, and I entered it in a smaller rally to test it out. Halfway through the event, the motor decided to weld itself useless. As the event was getting closer, I begged Ural America for help, and they answered in a big way. They agreed to officially sponsor me. I just couldn't tell anyone. Talk about confidence. They delivered a very secret weapon a few weeks before the 2001 Iron Butt Rally. I was going to be riding the first Ural motorcycle registered in the United States with a new, redesigned, more powerful engine. I had to sign all these non-disclosure agreements because the new engine, which was the first change in design since Moses rode one to the edge of the Red Sea, it was a big secret. The 2001 rally started and finished in Alabama with 3 checkpoints: California, Washington, and Maine. On a map, it just looked like a giant rectangle. How hard could this be, I thought?
At the Ramada Inn in Huntsville, Alabama, the motorcycle people have taken over, and not just any motorcycle people. Hello, everyone. I'm Dave Despain. Welcome to Bike Week. Let me show you some motorcycles here.
I am riding a 2001 Ural.
How do other people react when they hear that news?
Well, I get quite a bit of ribbing, but I give it right back so I can take it. And I've put a lot of miles on Urals, and things go wrong. I know what to do to fix it. And
So yes, I was laughed at for my choice of motorcycle. And some riders were upset that I was wasting a coveted spot that a real rider with a chance of finishing could have had. Sometimes we need to remind people, it's not the bike. Or when you live with multiple sclerosis, it's not our bodies, but the rider, the person, a spirit and willpower that will get us over the finish line. My bike was well prepared. I had huge saddlebags to fit all the extra spare parts and tools I'd be needing, a custom seat, a bigger windshield, extra driving lights, extra fuel tank, CB radio, radar detector, and a GPS. I was clearly ready to ride the world's toughest motorcycle competition, right? I thought so. You can taste the anxiety the morning of the start. After all, some of us have been planning this ride for years. My strategy, which I proudly proclaimed to anybody who would listen, was that I was going to ride as freaking fast as I could, so when I broke down, I would have twice as much time to fix the bike. I was the only one who thought I had any chance to even make the first checkpoint. Most riders were having an excellent first day, collecting bonuses by taking a photo with their rider flags. Whereas in West Memphis, Arkansas, and about 250 miles from the start, my Ural's engine self-destructed. I frantically called Ural America for help. Curiously, they didn't seem very surprised. We found a Ural dealer in Tennessee who didn't have any Ural bikes for sale, but he had his own personal motorcycle, his own personal Ural, and he agreed to let me borrow the engine from his own bike. Afraid to close my eyes during a 3-hour tow ride with an insane tow truck driver, I slept on the garage floor while the mechanic removed the diseased motor and swapped his own engine into my frame in the middle of the night. I was extremely grateful, and better yet, I was back in the rally. I left the garage like a bat out of hell. Probably not a very good idea. My bike now had a 1923 designed 650cc motor without electric starter, without electronic ignition. I soon realized the blinkers and the brake light weren't working. I kept waiting for the engine to warm up and smooth out, but apparently crappy was how this engine was supposed to run. I stopped to check on the rear lights, and after a quick rest, the engine refused to start. I alternated 4 hours of kicking and swearing with resting and praying before the engine haphazardly coughed to life. I was on the road again, heading to Pomona, and I was going to prove everybody wrong. That was until my morning freeway crash in Arkansas. The front end of the bike had developed a bit of a crunchy wobble, and a series of dips in the road had started an oscillating shimmy in the suspension. I knew I was in trouble when I looked to my left and I saw my own ass. I slid down the highway just behind my bike, watching these bright, colorful sparks, unlike any of those Japanese bikes could create. After I stopped rolling a bit, I slowly checked myself over. I was in one piece, but the bike, the windshield was cracked in half, the brake lever was bent, both air cleaners were nowhere to be found, the hand grips had been ground down, there was a 3-inch hole in the side of the engine which leaked oil all over the highway, there was damage to the saddlebags, the blinkers, and the driving lights. What a mess. I had made it through a blown engine, a scary tow ride, an engine transplant, electrical problems, 4 hours of just trying to kickstart the bike, and now a crash. The hardest part for me was realizing it had just been 24 hours since the 11-day event had begun. I was exhausted, I was bruised, I was embarrassed, and pissed off that this piece of crap machine couldn't even roll in a straight line without breaking down. Maybe it's just me, but anybody in the room starting to see how this adventure or misadventure is starting to look a little bit like those tougher days we experience with MS? I had given it all I had, but my iron butt rally was over. After I explained what had happened to the Arkansas State Trooper who had showed up, he asked me what I was going to do about it. And I just said, "What?" He says, "Why don't you see if you can patch it up and continue?" The thought had not occurred to me. I got out my JB Weld epoxy, my duct tape, and the officer patiently waited while I made the repairs. I told him I needed oil. He went back to his patrol car to see if a service truck might bring us some oil up on the highway. After he returned, I asked him if they would bring us some oil, and he said no, they wanted too much money. And I said, "I don't care if it's $100. I need oil to continue." He says, no, don't you worry. He says, "I called my wife at home. She agreed to go to the store, get 2 quarts of 2050 oil, and meet us up here on the highway." As I travel the country, I have benefited from the generosity of strangers, just like this, many, many times. The officer's encouragement to continue and his wife's selfless act of kindness are not as rare as this world would have us believe. asking for help or accepting help from friends or strangers is a sign of strength, not weakness. Please do not be afraid to ask for help when your MS causes you to stumble or crash. I rode to the first exit to really check myself over and put on some clean underwear. Day two's official rally headline read, "Team Lazarus rides again." Tuesday afternoon, I was experiencing this intermittent problem. The engine would suddenly lose power, but when I leaned over to look at it and try to figure out what was going on, it would suddenly run fine again. It happened 3 or 4 times before I finally realized there was nothing wrong with the motor. My pant leg was getting sucked into the open carburetors that had lost their air cleaners. Sort of reminds me how we're quick to kind of always blame MS for every ache and pain we have, right? Early the next morning, the headlight, once as bright as a lit cigarette, began to get dimmer and dimmer and dimmer. I pulled off the first exit and began checking over the wiring and connections. I found a broken wire in the alternator. I wasn't worried though, because I was carrying a spare. Unfortunately, the spare was for the newer motor and it did not fit the 650 engine that had been put into my frame. After a few dents in the tank and some cursing, an act of contrition, I was able to repair the alternator. I had to push start the bike again, but I did finally get it to run. And things were fairly normal until Wednesday afternoon. Now I'm 150 miles and about 5 hours before the first checkpoint closes. I was in the desert and it was 110 degrees. My bike has MS, remember? Well, my bike hated the heat. One of the 2 working cylinders calls it quits. I continued limping along at about 25 miles an hour until I reached the hill. The bike refused to go another inch and dies. I was completely fried. The bike was totally fried. The California Highway Patrol officer who stopped was not very friendly or willing to let me fiddle with it on the side of the road. I didn't even bother to ask him to call his wife. Against my will, we were towed into Barstow, California. I did all I could to fix the bike, but I finally conceded I would not make the Pomona checkpoint. I had been through so much. And I was so close, but my brain was fried, I was overheated, angry, and then I became extremely depressed. I was a failure. I called into the checkpoint reporting that I would not make it on time. That's when the rally staff reminded me I could miss one of the 4 checkpoints as long as I went there, got a gas receipt to prove I was there, and didn't miss any of the other checkpoints. I would, however, they said, have to forfeit all the bonuses that I had gained on legs 1 and 2 of the rally. Bonuses, I said? What the heck were those? I had no bonuses. The call gave me a surge of renewed energy and hope, and I eventually found a stripped bolt in the valve train and was able to jam 2 nuts together to get the bike to run. The bike started right up, and both the bike and I were running on both cylinders once again. I went to Pomona and I got my gas receipt. I got to experience the Santa Monica freeway during morning rush hour with only 1 turn signal and no brake lights. It was quite the experience. I only remember 1 breakdown on the way to Sunnyside, Washington, and I diagnosed it and fixed it, a loose plug wire, without even slowing down. I was getting pretty good at this. I fell asleep on a soft patch of parking lot asphalt, and upon waking up the next morning, I could hardly believe that I had made it all the way to checkpoint 2. I got scored, and besides the riders that were out of the rally, I was in last place in the points. Most riders were amazed to see me. They had heard some rumors that I was having some trouble. The Ural factory team was originally meeting me in Washington for an oil change, but now they were actually installing the only other 750cc engine in the country into my bike. My bike was now given its third engine and a full service. My electrical wiring was repaired, and heck, it was like I had a brand new old bike again, with a second chance at a good finish. Ever feel like you have superpowers after getting a dose of steroids? After I looked over the new bonus list and expressed to the rally staff that I was thinking about heading to Alaska for a huge bonus on this leg, I was strongly encouraged not to attempt Alaska. In fact, I was actually threatened. If I went and failed, my chances of ever riding the Ironbutt Rally again were slim to none. The rally organizer added, "Paul, you don't understand. More people are following you than the people that are winning the rally." And, he added quietly, "some of us actually think you might finish." Things were going pretty good until I heard this jingling sound coming from the left side of the engine. It sounded like keys dangling, but I began to get worried, so somewhere near Rock Springs, Wyoming, I pulled off the highway into a dirt parking lot to investigate. I found a lot of aluminum shavings in the valve cover. One of the engine push rods seemed bent. It was spinning in an oblong orbit. So I called and explained what I had found to Golden Hands Alex, who was the head Russian mechanic, who instructed me, "Remove pushrod, bang straight on rock with hammer." So I removed the bent pushrod only to find it wasn't bent. The steel cap had broken off the aluminum shaft. The pushrod was in two impossible pieces. So I called back the #1 top Russian factory expert technician, who simply said, "No problem. Find metal, make pushrod." Now, pushrods are somewhat important internal engine compartments of an internal engine. They move up and down and open and close the valves, letting in the gas and the air at just the right precise moments. John Quinones asks, "What would you do?" Now, I did have quite a bit of tools and spare parts with me, but I didn't have any spare push rods for the 750 motor. I knew duct tape wasn't going to hold, so I decided to try some epoxy. So I let the glue harden, and I put the push rod back in the engine. And I started the bike up, and I took off, trying to be real gentle on the throttle. Incredibly, I made it 50 miles before somewhere near Rawlings, Wyoming, the pasted together pushrod fails. Once again, I was putting along at 25 miles an hour. The engine was thumping, and the rhythm began to take on a very curious verse. Go home, go home, go home, go home, go home, go home, go home. This was a pivotal moment. I stood up on the pegs, I opened up my helmet visor, and I screamed at the top of my lungs, "I will not go home! I will not give up, you commie bastard!" Excuse me. And with a grease pencil, I wrote, "I will not give up," across my windshield. And I vowed no matter what, I was going to finish. I just needed a better plan. I caressed my injured donkey into Rawlins, Wyoming, where I found a hardware store. And in about 5 minutes, I discovered my solution. I purchased a couple of long, hardened drill bits. And with a grinder I had spotted in the back room, I forged myself a couple of brand new Ural push rods. Fine metal, make push rod. Check. The drill bit push rod worked, and the bike actually ran better than ever before. And better yet, I was back on the road and on my way to the third checkpoint. I made it to the third checkpoint in Maine, and I retrieved a care package that I had mailed there a few weeks earlier. The box reads, "This package is for the guy riding the biggest piece of crap in the Iron Butt Rally." You know, my whole life I found laughing and joking, even at my own expense, to be powerful medicine. Today, living with MS symptoms and deficits is no different. I often make fun of my bad memory, bladder, when I trip or get lost in a parking lot and need help. For me, joking gives the disease less power over me. Here's a picture of my bike's windshield with my words of encouragement from Wyoming. With the exception of another charging system failure and another alternator repair, I had a rather uneventful 1,300-mile ride to the finish in Madison, Alabama. Of the 114 riders that started the 2001 Iron Butt Rally, 93 made it over the finish line. I may have come in 86th place, but I did indeed finish the world's toughest motorcycle competition. In 11 days, I had ridden the motorcycle, never intended for anything even remotely close to what I did to it. I rode a bike in an event where other riders thought I was just wasting a valuable entry spot. And even the organizers officially listed me in the hopeless class. I crossed the finish line on a bike whose own company president said wouldn't make it. My struggle to overcome impossible challenges over those 11 unforgettable days helped shape who I am and continues to give me strength to believe in myself in the most trying times. And also taught me if my desire and willpower is strong enough, there's nothing multiple sclerosis can stop me from attempting. This story helps me get through those days when my symptoms seem like they're winning, or when I wake up worried about disease progression. I hope sharing my story can help you as well. Having a brain riddled with holes, having a physical or mental challenge, or riding a piece of crap motorcycle should never confine or define who we are. Please remember, you do not have to come in first place to still be a winner. I know we all have different MS symptoms, and my course of the disease has been quite manageable compared to some. I certainly don't expect anyone in this room to run out, buy a motorcycle, and ride it all over creation. But I do know some of you may have been passionate about something at some time, and maybe that passion was put aside after getting diagnosed. I hope my million-mile journey for MS inspires you to return to or find a new passion in your life, and to make that passion more important than your disease. Look beyond the obstacles in the road, lean hard into the wind, and never give up on your hopes and dreams. Thank you all for being a good audience. I know we got a lot of stuff going on here.
It's great talk, great talk. Always a great talk. We're going to do questions for Paul before we begin the rest of the series of tonight's program. Does anybody have questions for Paul? I am not going to be running around the room. I have a bad ankle. Sarah will be running around the room. If you have a question, please raise your hand, and Sarah can find you. Anybody? Anybody want to know if his motorcycle's still alive or not?
I have one thing to say. There was no collusion with the Russians. None.
I have one, Paul. What kind of bike do you ride now when you go to these events?
It ain't a Russian Ural. I am riding a Yamaha. It's actually out in the parking lot. It's filthy dirty, well abused. When I first started my million-mile journey, I was thinking, all the manufacturers would be throwing motorcycles at me left and right. Well, that's not how it works. It took me the first 300,000 miles to get some of the manufacturers to realize I was serious. And a couple of years ago, Yamaha started supporting me, and now they're really doing a great job supporting me. They actually donated the bike that I'm riding right now. It's a Yamaha Star Venture, which is their big luxury touring bike, and I'm beating the crap out of it. But it's dependable, and it's got to start and run every day. So I'm riding Yamahas. Yeah. The delightful Ural. What happened to it? Well, Ural America had loaned it to me, sort of. So they were supposed to meet me afterwards to get the bike back. And they were all excited about the bike. And I gave it to them just as I rode it. Everything I had on the bike, I gave it to them. And the first I heard, they were going to put it in a museum or something. But I think once my story was published, and they realized, how many times I broke down and that the story was about the thing falling apart, I think the two guys that helped me out were murdered by KGB. I think the bike was dismantled, put in the crusher multiple times, and I think they're still looking for me. I have no idea where it is. They are fun. They're just not made for endurance competitions. Any other questions?
We do. We have one over here.
I was just wondering, what is it that, right here?
Okay.
I was wondering, what is it that, or how did you become inspired to ride the bike, and what is it that gave you the ability to make the passion for riding more important than the disease?
Great question. So motorcycling's always been a big part of my life, and when I was diagnosed with MS, actually, this story is about the 2001 rally with the Ural. Well, the rally's every 2 years. So in 2003, I entered again with a BMW, a dependable bike. And during the 2003 Iron Butt Rally, I was actually in first place in the points, and I had my first MS attack during that rally. I ended up finishing the rally, and I quit riding motorcycles at that point. And I gave up riding for 7 years. I thought that I had MS. I would be, in a wheelchair, unable to ride, unable to do everything I love to do. I quit riding, sold the bikes. I gave up on a lot of things in life. And, 7 years went by, and I went on disease-modifying treatment. I started taking a little bit better care of myself. Eating well and exercising and things. And it occurred to me that maybe I'd given up a little early on something that I really loved. And I knew that I couldn't compete because I have a lot of trouble with the cognitive stuff of rallying. But I realized I could ride a motorcycle across the country in a couple of days and spend the time and the hours in the saddle. I could still do that. And so it took me a little while to figure out how I could use motorcycling, the thing that I really loved, to give back to the MS community. And that's when I, decided to document 1 million miles, just start at zero and just see where I could go. And originally I just started riding to MS patient events like this all around New England. After work, I'd go ride to a couple of things, and that's how I started the 1 million miles. And then I started doing presentations and speaking. I do a lot of motorcycle presentations, and everywhere I go, I take the bike and I record my miles. And that's how I started, and that's what I'm doing. You know, the motorcycling to me, and it doesn't, you know, whatever activity it is, I don't care if it's knitting, crocheting, playing basketball, something that you really love to do, spend time thinking about it or doing it every day instead of the junk, the crap, you know? Think about it. If I'm not riding, I'm planning my next trip or figuring out how to get around the next snowstorm.
Any other questions for Paul? Right there.
So the question is, what were my first symptoms, right? So my first symptoms were numbness and tingling in my arms and a lot of memory issues. During that rally, I lost a whole day. I didn't know where I had been. I had come across an accident, motorcycle accident, and I thought I knew the rider. I stopped. The EMTs are asking me about the rider, and I'm looking right at the guy's face, and I couldn't tell him who he was. And he was a fellow rider from New Hampshire, and actually the gentleman that we had shared a hotel room with the night before, we had shared a hotel room with, and I couldn't remember his name. I couldn't say his name. So I was having a lot of cognitive issues, and the cognitive issues is what drove me eventually to the neurologist to figure out what was going on.
Hey, let's first give Paul another round of applause. Thank you, Paul. I'll see you soon again.